The cranes arrived before the people. In city after city across China, towers rose from empty plains, highways were laid through farmland, and shopping centers opened with no customers. The buildings were finished, the streets were lit, but the residents never came. What went wrong? Or, and this is the more unsettling question, what if nothing went wrong at all? This is not a story of failure. It may be a story of a plan so large and so long in its horizon that most of the world simply misread it. China's urbanization in the late 20th and early 21st century was unlike anything in human history. In 1978, roughly 18% of China's population lived in cities. By 2020, that figure had risen to over 60%. That is nearly 600 million people relocating within a single lifetime. The government did not wait for people to move before building. It built first. The strategy was deliberate, and it had a name: Anticipatory Urbanization. Cities were constructed in advance of demand, designed to absorb the population waves planners predicted were coming. The math seemed straightforward. Migration from rural provinces was expected to continue for decades. Infrastructure takes years to build. If you wait for people before you build, you fall behind, so you build ahead. But the scale at which China did this had no precedent, and the results looked, from the outside, like the largest construction error in history. The most photographed example is Kangbashi, a district of the city of Ordos in Inner Mongolia. Ordos was built to house 1 million people, wide boulevards, modern residential towers, a monumental central square with a statue of the Mongolian leader Genghis Khan rendered in gleaming metal. By 2010, fewer than 30,000 people lived there. Photographs spread globally. Journalists and economists flew in. The phrase "ghost city" entered the vocabulary of urban disaster coverage. Ordos became a symbol of central planning gone wrong, of state hubris, of money disconnected from human need. But the symbol was also, in important ways, incomplete. Ordos had coal. The surrounding region of Inner Mongolia sat on some of the largest coal reserves in China. The early 2000s coal boom made local governments briefly rich, and they spent that wealth building a city they believed prosperity would fill. When coal prices collapsed after 2008, the economic foundation cracked. Migration stalled. The ghost city was not a planning illusion. It was a bet on commodity prices that lost. That distinction matters, because most of China's so-called ghost cities were not uniform failures. They were experiments, each with its own logic, its own timeline, and its own outcome. By the time Western media had settled on the ghost city narrative, some of those cities were already filling up. Zhengzhou's new district, which appeared largely empty in drone footage from 2012, had by 2019 absorbed hundreds of thousands of residents. Kaohsiung, an eco-city built on reclaimed land near the Bohai Sea and genuinely troubled for years, eventually found partial purpose as an industrial and port zone. The ghost city label froze these places in a single moment. But cities do not develop in a moment. Here is something the popular narrative consistently missed. In China, the entity that owns land is the state. Local governments fund their budgets largely through land sales, selling use rights to developers who build housing. If population growth justifies the sale, the model works. If growth does not materialize fast enough, the government holds empty infrastructure and mounting debt. This is not a coincidence or a byproduct. It is the structural incentive that drove construction. Mayors and provincial officials were evaluated by GDP growth. Construction generates GDP. The more you build, the better your numbers look, regardless of occupancy. One scholar who studied this dynamic directly was the economist George Magnus, who described China's local government financing system as one of the most consequential and least understood debt structures in the modern world. Land revenue and off-balance sheet borrowing through financing vehicles created obligations that did not appear in official fiscal accounts. Nobody knows the exact total. Estimates of local government debt in China have ranged, depending on methodology, from 20 trillion to 50 trillion yuan, which at various exchange rates represents trillions of US dollars. The ghost cities were not just urban planning stories, they were balance sheet stories. And then there is the population question that reframes everything. China's one-child policy, implemented in 1980 and not fully relaxed until 2015, was reshaping the country's demographic structure throughout the same decades when ghost cities were rising. Planners in the 90s and early 2000s were projecting urbanization based on a population that, by the 2030s and 2040s, would begin to shrink. The cities built to absorb migrants may eventually need to absorb older populations instead, or they may simply not be absorbed at all. This is the layer that most coverage leaves out. China's fertility rate has fallen to approximately 1.09, among the lowest ever recorded for a major economy. The rural population that was expected to migrate into those new cities for another generation is smaller than projected. The demand that was supposed to arrive may arrive late, or diminished, or not at all. The ghost cities were not only a planning overshoot, they were built inside a demographic assumption that is now being revised in real time. There is a human cost to this that numbers cannot fully contain. Farmers whose land was acquired, often compulsorily and for below-market compensation, to make way for new development, were displaced from communities that had existed for generations. Some were relocated to new apartments in the very cities being constructed, receiving housing in exchange for land. That exchange sounded, in official framing, like modernization. For many families, it meant losing the agricultural base that had defined their economic life for generations. The apartment did not come with an income. In documented cases across Hunan, Sichuan, and Hebei provinces, residents described receiving relocation payments that covered moving costs, but left them without work in cities that had no employers yet. The buildings were real, the economy inside them was not invented, not exceptional. Repeated, at smaller scales, in hundreds of locations across the country. By the late 2010s, the Chinese government began to acknowledge that the model had limits. New policies attempted to redirect investment towards cities with genuine population growth, primarily the mega-city clusters around Beijing, Shanghai, the Pearl River Delta, and the Chengdu-Chongqing corridor. Smaller cities, particularly in the northeast, the former industrial heartland of Liaoan, Jilin, and Heilongjiang, were acknowledged as shrinking. The concept of managed urban contraction entered Chinese urban policy language for the first time. This was a significant admission from a government that had spent 3 decades equating growth with success. The 500 ghost cities figure, which appears frequently in headlines, is itself debated. Researchers at Standard Chartered estimated in 2014 that China had approximately 50 cities with significant vacancy and under-occupancy. The number 500 comes largely from counting all new urban districts, not cities but expansion zones, and applying the ghost city label to any that showed low density in satellite imagery at a single point in time. That methodology overstates the problem. It also understates something else. Even the most generous accounting reveals a construction overhang, excess housing stock, unoccupied commercial space, and underused infrastructure that represents an enormous misallocation of capital. The Chinese property sector accounts for, by most estimates, somewhere between a quarter and a third of the country's GDP when upstream and downstream industries are included. A correction in that sector is not a contained event. It is an economic event of national consequence. The near collapse of Evergrande in 2021 made this concrete in a way that analysts had warned about for years. Evergrande alone had liabilities exceeding $300 billion. Its projects, many of them unfinished apartments sold to buyers who had already paid, sat incomplete across dozens of cities. The ghost city was no longer only an urban planning curiosity. It had become a financial crisis in slow motion. The question now is not whether the model produced distortions. It clearly did. The question is what China does with the infrastructure it already has. The towers, the roads, the transit lines, the water systems, in cities that remain 20 or 40% occupied. Some will fill. Migration within China continues, even if at a slower pace. Some of the newer districts attached to established cities will grow into themselves over the next decade as populations consolidate around economic centers. Others will not. And in those cases, the country faces a choice with no clean precedent in urban planning history: what to do with modern, functional, expensive infrastructure that no longer has a demographic purpose. It will be decades before anyone knows whether this was strategic overreach, structural miscalculation, or something more ambiguous. A bet on a future that is still deciding whether to arrive. The cranes have mostly stopped in the places they should not have started. The cities they left behind are not ruins. They are something harder to categorize, finished, and waiting, in a country that built them faster than history could decide what to do with them.